Hey, Bill.
How you doing, Conn?
I'm doing well. It's a drizzly, almost San Franciscan day here in Washington, D.C. How's it up there in Massachusetts?
It is very similar, in fact. For once, our weather is in sync. I haven't had a chance to talk to you since the glorious liberal progressive restoration.
Not over the phone. We've chatted over email, but this is our first time speaking over the phone.
How have you been taking things?
I feel much the same way I did when Hillary Clinton finally dropped out. It's like a cloud of silliness has been lifted, and we can now accept the reality that has been in front of our faces for such a long, long time.
Welcome to the reality-based community.
I guess you could say that, but I think I had a slightly different idea of what that community is. But it's good to get this pretending that there's a competitive election over with, and we can move on to seeing how many of Barack Obama's promises become true.
You were well braced. You always envisioned this to happen. You
right.
were not surprised.
Not at all.
Do you feel that your fellow... Well, maybe we should get to the conservative attitudes in a second.
I think that'd be better.
Okay. After hearing a bunch of punditry about this is still a center-right nation, my peeps at Campaign for America's Future are trying to correct the record and note this is actually a center-left nation as things stand. We did a poll with Stan Greenberg, which we often do after elections, to see what the public was calling for in an election. And our polling memo was picked up by Todd Beaton at MyDD. Todd said, it's amusing to hear Republicans talk in circles about Barack Obama's victory last week. You recall during the campaign they insisted Obama was a socialist, that he was the most liberal senator in Washington, but when confronted with the fact that the country picked that liberal socialist guy by 7 points, suddenly it's Obama ran as a conservative, he was a Reaganite, or McCain was a horrible candidate. He then quotes from the memo itself.
Yeah, because no one ever said McCain was a horrible candidate until after the election.
Maybe some did. Not everybody. But you get points, Conn.
Okay.
So the poll memo says, Obama's election was produced by, if not an ideological earthquake, a major shifting of the plates. While some have talked about this being a center-right country, the electorate that sent Obama to the White House considered the ideological issues that came at them sharply on the side of progressive choices on public policy. On virtually every dimension of the liberal-conservative debate, voters have moved to a new place. They've shown a new openness for the country to use government for a range of public purposes, restoring taxes on the wealthiest and corporations to bring sustained relief to the middle class, and regulate corporate excess to protect the public. A large majority wants to reduce troops in Iraq, while support for multilateralism over go-it-alone military-centric policy has held at historic highs. Despite results in some ballot measures this year, voters show a new level of tolerance on sexual preference, with 54% saying homosexuality should be accepted and not discouraged. Some additional polling data breaking it down by liberal, moderate, conservative. It was done by my boss, Bob Borisage, at ourfuture.org, because some conservatives have noted that yes, the liberal, moderate, conservative breakdown of the exit polling is pretty static, but the moderates are still sharing liberal views on a host of these issues. As far as what that means going forward, the New Republic wrote, the greatest risk for Democrats is not that Obama will try to do too much, but that their terror of failure will lead them to waste an historic opportunity. This is not a Clintonian moment. It's more like the moment Lyndon Johnson inherited in 1965 or the one Franklin Roosevelt faced in 1933, a chance to reshape American government. Josh Marshall at Talking Points concurred. This is why, perhaps paradoxically, I'm not overly concerned at the rumored cabinet appointments that have some people worried. For a strong-willed president, cabinet officers are there to execute the president's vision and plan, and experience in government is an asset in execution if it can be a detriment to breadth of vision and ambition. Obama promised big things, and I take him at his word. I think that notion is getting out there a little bit more now because there's been a more concerted push. I don't know how conservatives are taking that.
Well, 2 points. First, I wish you guys all the luck in the world because I'm hoping for a big Obama overreach. So I want to give you guys all the rope you can do it. So, yes, we are on a new progressive nation. We woke up on Wednesday and all of a sudden the nation is just like Berkeley, California. Please do act accordingly as you guys see fit. But no, I mean, polls are polls, and the Club for Growth had their own poll out. They polled 12 congressional districts, 11 of which switched from Republican to Democrat and were won by Barack Obama. So these are the Barack Obama voters, the people that switched over. And Club for Growth, they phrase questions a little bit differently than you guys do. So this is what they found. 73% of voters prefer the federal government to focus on, quote, creating economic conditions that give all people opportunities to create wealth through their own efforts over, quote, spreading wealth from higher income people to middle and lower income people. So everyone can commission their own poll to show what they want. But, when you look back and see what, Barack Obama actually ran on, I think it's a bit less as of the progressive utopia than you might want to remember. This is what I wrote on Wednesday morning under the title "Congratulations, President-elect Obama." After a hard-fought campaign nearly 2 years in the making, last night a candidate was elected President of the United States. That candidate promised to cut taxes for 90% of workers and their families, expand the Army by 65,000 and the Marines by 27,000, and enact a, quote, net spending cut for the federal government. Lower taxes, strong defense, and shrinking the size of governments. These are core conservative beliefs, and anyone who claims yesterday's election was the end of conservatism simply was not paying attention to the election.
Well, that's a very creative cherry picking.
Thank you. So I get the big bucks.
Let me add one other thing to this. In the formal exit poll, and I mentioned this in the last blog again, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself. I know you weren't here for that.
Oh, I watch them all.
The exit poll asked, "Do you want government to do more or do less?" Do more won 51 to 43. So that's not a politically active group like Campaign for America's Future or Club for Growth. That's just a generic exit poll, a pretty straightforward question.
Because that question's not vague at all. Do more.
Well, it's about government. If people had some intrinsic antipathy towards government, you would say do less.
Yes, if it was intrinsic antipathy. But as far as what specifically progressives should be doing forward, a 51-43 mandate for more leaves a bit to interpretation. And like I said before, I wish you guys all the luck in the world in convincing the Obama administration that it is in as progressive a direction as you say it is.
Well, I'm very heartened by what happened earlier this week. Senator Max Baucus, Democrat from Montana, pretty right-leaning Democrat, definitely not in the liberal, progressive, populist mold. He chairs the Finance Committee. When Democrats took over Congress in 2007, he was watering down a lot of progressive legislation, tilting it towards business interests. But he came out yesterday, and so he has jurisdiction over health care, as does Senator Ted Kennedy, who chairs the Health, Education, Labor Committee. There is some expectation that the two of them might have some friction because they come from different ideological perspectives. But Baucus's legislative proposal hewed very closely to what Obama proposed, which includes a public plan option. So the government creates a public plan option that competes with private plans and has additional regulation on private companies so they can't discriminate against elderly clients or people with pre-existing conditions. And so there's obviously a lot of devils in the details that I'm sure will be hashed out. I'm not saying this is a glide path to legislative victory, but for Baucus to come out with that from the get-go and essentially and not provoke a fight with Obama says to me that he felt the progressive mandate. He recognized that Obama talked about government action, public investment, doing something on health care as well as other things like clean energy and infrastructure. Those elements of his platform came through loud and clear, saw the endorsement it got from the public, and acted accordingly. Now, you might worry that's an overreach. Bill Kristol in 1993 was very concerned that something like that got passed, it would seal in a Democratic majority for a generation. And not to just to mention other blogs that have talked about this, I'll put up links to Ezra Klein, Jonathan Conant in The Republic, folks, Steve Bennett at the Washington Monthly, Kevin Drill, and Mother Jones. I think they've all had commentary on this. I'll get those links up.
Yeah, no, I guess I wouldn't call the Baucus plan all that new. Baucus has been talking healthcare for a long time. He's tried to bring Republicans on a number of times.
But not this plan.
Close to it. I mean, the headlines I saw, you picked up on actually what I would say is the bigger part of it, which is the public plan option, which is interesting because that part of it is something Barack Obama really soft pedals.
It's in his white paper.
No, it's there.
Yeah.
It's there. It's just not the emphasis that he gives.
He emphasized the cutting of premium costs. That was more.
Right.
That kind of cuts to the bone more for most folks. It's
but what I was going to say is all the headlines I saw about the Baucus plan was the mandate headline was that Baucus wants to bring back the mandates, which is the same mandate versus non-mandate fight that Obama and Hillary had in the primaries.
My attitude towards that, I side with Jacob Hacker and Robert Reich that this is not the biggest policy dispute in the world. There are others that disagree. Obviously, Obama and Clinton went at it pretty hard, but it affects only 3% of the population. I don't think it's something that's would be a stumbling block. Even though Baucus has it and Obama didn't, I don't think it's going to be something that would prevent them from coming to any kind of consensus.
Right. My point was that I wasn't surprised to see Baucus come out with a plan, but I don't think it's quite signals what Obama's going to do as far as a mandate. They tried a somewhat similar plan in Massachusetts, and the costs.
Well, Massachusetts doesn't have a public plan option.
That's true. So it would cost less than what Barack Obama's plan would.
Well,
so Barack Obama's plan with the public option would be even more expensive.
I mean, the Massachusetts model is one of the arguments against the individual mandate approach, because if the costs don't come down commensurate to it, the mandate isn't very good, and Massachusetts ended up actually begging off of really enforcing that mandate in any kind of serious way. It may be better than things were. But it's by no means flawless. But that's getting down in the policy weeds. But my point, as far as in terms of center-left mandate is concerned, I don't think Baucus would have come out with this plan if he didn't sense that mandate was there, because he has not been ideologically predisposed to such bold and comprehensive legislation before.
Well, let me put it this way: the Massachusetts plan, no matter how much it closely resembles Obama's plan tonight, is definitely more of a universal coverage type plan, which is also something Hawaii has tried. And Hawaii's was so expensive that they had to abandon it. And Massachusetts, the costs are through the roof.
I think this is arguably an issue that really can't be solved on a state-by-state basis. You need to control healthcare costs in a national setting.
Yeah, you're not going to control them. But yeah, I mean, we'll see how much Barack Obama believes he can actually control Medicare costs. I don't think you're going to see him move on health care within the first year. He's going to have way too much other. He's going to have money flying out of Washington on so many other areas, which we'll get to when we talk the bailouts. I think the deficit numbers are just going to be too big even for him.
Is there a debate in terms of the mandate? Should he be hemmed in because of the needs of the financial crisis, or should the deficit not be a short-term concern, which previous deficit hawks like Robert Rubin and Larry Summers have said, and even conservative economists, names escape me a little bit, starts with an F, Feldstein?
I don't know who you're talking about. Furman?
No, I think Martin Feldstein's his name.
Yes, Marty over at AI.
So those folks are saying we need to have a big stimulus. The deficit is not a short-term concern. We need to invest in things that are going to pay off in the long run, like energy, like infrastructure, like healthcare. The impetus behind these healthcare proposals. You will argue that they're budget busters. We would cite studies that they show long-term cost savings.
Is it now your position that healthcare is also stimulus? We know that cap and trade is stimulus because it's green jobs, and of course bailing out Wall Street and Detroit are all stimulus. So is healthcare now stimulus too? Well,
it's a relief on business. If you're relieving businesses of very burden of skyrocket.
Is there any government spending which is not economic stimulus?
I mean, ideally, you would want any.
Oh, bad. Okay.
Any
awesome.
Public investment.
Awesome.
There's a difference between public investment and wasteful spending. No.
Right. All government spending is good government spending that stimulates the economy.
Benefit
Got
to American quality of life, I would say, is good public investment. Stuff that goes into wasteful projects that don't work or are irrelevant would be negative pork. And the sign of good government versus bad government, which I think we'll have an opportunity for the public to weigh in on in 4 years, is did an Obama administration, a Democratic Congress, invest your taxpayer money well, or did they waste it? So it's not, you're not going to have I think knee-jerk debates over all government good or all government bad, which is I think what we've had for a long time now. A question of quality of government: is this a good government idea? Is this worth the money to be investing? Is it going to pay off in the long run?
Well, I think this is a perfect transition to talking about the bailouts that are going on right now in Washington. Why don't there's so many?
You want to go to bailout as opposed to conservative future?
Why don't we? Yeah, we'll get there because I just think we're on the topic now. Why don't we start with the auto bailout, which Obama is for?
Though he hasn't specified his particulars. But he's for,
right,
he's for it in concept.
But he's for bailing out the big three so they don't have to go into bankruptcy. Right. And the Politico reported that he wants to appoint a high-profile person to oversee reforms in the alien auto industry, which a number of people, including Orrin at the Vol Conspiracy, have dubbed Obama's car czar. And Orrin Kerr quips, "I don't know about you, but I really look forward to purchasing my new U.S. government Model 1 car when the new models are introduced in 2011. Of course, the Model 1 will be the only car sold in America by then, so if you want a car, that will be the only one to buy." And Don Boudreaux, who's an economist over at George Mason, had a snappy response to a Center for American Progress post about the impending auto industry bailout. The cap post was, "If it happens, auto industry bailouts need to be done right." And Boudreaux writes, "While it's true that some ways of bailing out the industry would be less harmful than other ways, there's absolutely no right way to do it. To advise the government to do the auto industry bailout right makes as much sense as advising a burglar to burgle the neighborhood houses right." So, yeah, we're talking about government investments and wise spending and the rest of it. And I'm sure you guys on the left are just absolutely loving your new ownership of Detroit and all the wise investments that are going to be made in the auto industry. I congratulate you on your new portfolio.
Well, I think love is a strong word, but there are potential opportunities here. We have long been...
Of course there are. The government's involved. There's all kinds of awesome opportunities to help stimulate the economy.
We happen to believe that there's a role for government in things.
Right. It's much better that government run the big three than the people that have been running it so far.
Well, some of the people that have been running it do not deserve much of a pat on the back. I don't think there's a great desire on the left for a government to run the big three, but it is a dire circumstance, and there is a public need for more clean energy and energy efficient vehicles, not only for economic reasons but for environmental reasons and national security reasons. So you have an immediate emergency where 3 million jobs are potentially on the line. There's an argument that
and not just any jobs, good democratic union jobs,
good paying
and that's very important.
We do like people to have good paying jobs that can provide for a family. That is true.
And the union jobs are the best because that money gets siphoned off and given right back to you guys.
I'm not sure I get a kickback from...
But the Democratic Party does, and the politicians, the Apollo Alliance, all those groups, all those lefty groups get tons of money from the unions.
I can't say there's really all that much financial incentive for us if a automaker gets to keep his $60,000 a year union job. But we do like unions. We do think unions are...
Unions give tens of millions of dollars to Democrats and the left every year. You guys want to give up that money?
If folks,
you guys aren't giving up that money.
If folks on the right showed, there are unions who have been friendly to conservatives in the past. Carpenters unions,
in the distant past. What's it? In the distant past.
But if you guys showed some interest in what would help folks in working America, I'm sure you can get your hands on some of that money too. But believe you me, it's not. This is not a business deal for us. This is part of our.
Oh, but
philosophy.
It is. Oh, but it is.
feel free to go deeper into conspiracy theory land.
No, it's not a conspiracy theory. I wrote about it. It's what I like to call progressive corporatism. It is pure myth that liberals, progressives. It is pure myth that liberals and progressives are enemies of big business. The left loves big business. Who else could possibly afford the exorbitant big labor contracts? As Emily Schley's details in her book, The Forgotten Man, the New Deal was not about big government pushing around big business. It was about big business, big labor, and big government getting together in one room to screw over small business and taxpayers. That is what the New Deal extended the Depression a decade longer than it had to be. And we're there again. You're not going to let the big corporations go out of money because they're going to go out of business or file for Chapter 11 because all those big union contracts with those big union benefits would go to a bankruptcy judge that could then rewrite them. That is why they are so intent on bailing them out and not allowing them to go to bankruptcy, because the union benefits and the union jobs are at risk. It's not a conspiracy, it's just a fact.
There's a lot there that I find utterly ridiculous. I think I did it back.
Do you deny that that's a big reason why the unions do not want GM and all those other car companies to go to bankruptcies, because bankruptcy judges would then have the power to rewrite those union contracts?
I think there's a larger concern that bankruptcy is not a feasible option for GM altogether.
Airlines have gone in and out of bankruptcy all the time, and not everyone loses their job.
That often is the
many
case.
really have survived.
And there was a post by Justin Fox at the Curious Capitalist, part-time magazine, who is someone who has generally promoted the notion that, hey, we have a government program called bankruptcy that is meant to deal with these situations.
I find it interesting that you call it a government program.
Well, this is what he said.
It is contractual default rights run through the court system. It is not.
The courts are a function of government.
They are. They're one of the good ones, like national defense and police. There are some parts of the government that conservatives are big supporters of, and the courts are one of them.
I'm glad we can agree on something. So Justin Fox has generally held to the view that bankruptcy is a perfectly fine route for General Motors and the Big Three. But he also noted that there was a counter view put in the Wall Street Journal, and I won't go through the whole thing, but the Wall Street Journal reporter had said that getting debtor-in-possession financing, the kind of financing you would get to stay afloat during bankruptcy, would be practically impossible given the state of the credit markets and the size of GM's obligations. And Justin Fox said, if GM really can't get it, then maybe there is a case made for direct federal financing for GM. Now, it's a debatable point, but it would certainly not be objectively indisputable that the only reason why union leaders, union workers, or anyone else would want to avoid bankruptcy is only because their contracts be rewritten. Part of a bailout deal could involve them getting their contracts rewritten. And Thomas Friedman promoted that point in his column yesterday. Maybe Obama's for that, for all I know. He hasn't laid that out. It's not what I'm for, but that's something that could be on the table. But it seems like there's an argument to be made that bankruptcy is just not a feasible route. And now you can make the argument that, hey, they should just, die a quick death, and that's the way the market works. But that is 3 million jobs. That would greatly deepen the recession. And you could argue that that's something pain we have to deal with. But I would argue, and it's something that I've blogged about myself and others have, that we have a national need for energy efficiency and clean energy that has, again, the economic, environmental, and national security implications. And this is an opportunity to accelerate that. So we can give those loans and help them out of bankruptcy for a deal where they actually go into overdrive and start doing plug-in hybrids and the like, which Al Gore laid out in his op-ed in the New York Times, would be part of a comprehensive smart grid strategy that would help us store surplus electricity and allow us to distribute electricity in a much more efficient manner. So that's just a philosophy of governance and a vision for the country that I know you don't subscribe to, but it's really nothing to do with this very elaborate big labor, big business conspiracy that you have painted.
Yeah, well, big labor, it's not small entrepreneurs and startup companies.
Well, Gore
that,
also noted
that have labor contracts. It's big
Gore
corporations.
Also noted that a strategy like that should not only favor the big three, but also should have investment in startup companies as well, and I would agree with that.
But let's be fair to the unions and the big auto companies, because they're not the only ones with their hands out in Washington. General Electric also wants cash. The states want cash. Any number of different banks and utilities also want cash. So, there's just so many business interests and state and local government interests here in Washington all wanting a piece of the $700 billion Paulson pie. And, of course, Paulson announced yesterday that whole TARP thing, that whole troubled assets program that he advanced, that he first tried to sell and did sell Congress, that's gone. Just kidding. And so now we have a consumer credit crisis, which I didn't even know there was a consumer credit crisis. I'm still getting offers in the bank for credit card companies trying to loan me more money. So I didn't know there was a consumer crunch. But Michelle Malkin writes about the inevitable downfall of Paulson's TARP plan. Malkin writes, during the crap sandwich 2.0 debate, such as it was with Paulson, Bush, Pelosi, Reid, gun to our heads, the Hill's few staunch conservatives were derided by chicken littles in both parties for warning about the unintended consequence of massive bailouts. The bailout opponents were mocked for their ideological purity. Their intellect was doubted. Now with the floodgates wide open and every last corporate special interest clamoring for a piece of crap sandwich 2.0, the chicken littles are horrified at what the bailout opponents knew would happen all along. Nobody could have seen the subprices coming, the bailout boosters claimed as the blind Paulson led his blind followers along. Nobody could see the mega bailout orgy coming. They will now cluck. BS. It's been on the horizon for more than a year. If you didn't see this coming, pro-bailout Republicans, you don't deserve leadership positions in the party that is supposed to stand for fiscal conservatism and the free market, and you certainly don't deserve to complain about the outcome with any shred of credibility. The blind should step aside and let those with 2020 vision take over. We need a fiscal conservative counterinsurgency that fights with foresight and not hindsight.
I don't know what that means.
What do you mean you don't know what that means?
What's a fiscal conservative counterinsurgency? What is the actual plan? Or is it just simply that we wouldn't do anything, we would just let the market play out?
I think what Malkin is saying is that they should not have signed on to the bailout bill, which has not been used at all in what it was.
And instead do what?
Let the market do what it was going to do.
That's what I wanted to get. And there are folks. There's some folks on the left that say that too. I think this argument actually does not.
More than a few.
What's that?
More than a few.
I'm sorry?
More than a few.
Yes. And there's plenty of people on the left that are not happy at the way Paulson has handled things, and a great distress at the lack of transparency. But of course, there are folks which part ways at what should be done instead. There's more folks on the left that are not happy, but certainly willing to directly get these equity shares in exchange for some stiff regulation, caps on executive compensation and the like, make sure taxpayers get their money back for being involved in a rescue.
Well,
I'm sure you guys have not before.
I just can't wait till January 20th when the crap sandwich is officially 100% yours. Enjoy it.
Thank you. I do want to. I neglected to mention one UAW-related post. I just want to get that in. Jonathan Tassini, who talked because there's some folks on the right, going back to the auto bailout, saying that these guys have these fat gold-plated contracts, lavish benefits, and that's the problem with everything. He said, "Why should UAW members get such rich contracts? First, let's get real. UAW members are not living large, though compared to Walmart workers, they're better off. It's not UAW pensions that are the problem. It's the CEO pensions, for example, that are weighing down the auto companies, particularly GM. But here's the larger point. If you tear up union contracts and cut wages and benefits, how the hell do our brilliant leaders think the consumer-driven economy will work? People are totally maxed out on their credit cards. Home equity cash is gone. If you cut wages, how exactly will 70% of the economy, consumer spending, be generated?" And this speaks to a larger point of how progressives and conservatives would handle things. We're not content to just sort of sit back and let all the pieces fall down. things that we would argue were generated by a lot of conservative policies, of course.
Right, you want to tell Detroit what cars they can build and how they can build them and how much electricity they should use.
Well, we were trying to tell Detroit what to build for a long time, and they resisted.
Exactly.
We thought there should be government regulations about fuel
efficiency. If only government had been running Detroit sooner.
Not running, but setting down standards. Instead, Detroit said, "Oh, we can't survive if we build fuel-efficient cars. We have to build giant SUVs." Meanwhile, they got lapped by Japanese automakers, and now they're facing bankruptcy. So let's have a game plan.
Those Japanese automakers who are able to build those small cars because they have factories in the United States that don't have union contracts.
They have facilities here, of course. That's true. But
non-union facilities.
Nevertheless, they build more fuel efficient cars than the Big Three does. They had a different game plan. So it actually is an argument that's not. Your argument is actually that labor costs are not the problem.
No, but that is my argument.
What's that?
That is my argument, actually.
That's not labor costs.
That it was labor costs.
But you just said Toyota has factories here.
Yes, non-union factories. See the difference there? Union factories in Detroit, non-union factories in Kentucky.
So that's the only reason why.
It's a big reason why.
Well, I think actually the cars they build have something to do with it also. And
their choice in the cars that they built was instructed by their cost structure, which includes their large labor inputs.
Do you know what the average UAW salary is?
Not off the top of my head, no.
$60,000.
It's good money.
It's decent money. It's
very good money.
It's average. It's median money. It's not living high on the hog. It's pretty basic.
Fair enough. Did you want to move on to our next topic?
Sure.
Okay.
Future conservatism?
Yes.
I got to say, I apologize in advance if I come across too glib and snarky in this moment of victory for liberals and progressives. But I got to say, watching the conservative movement in the aftermath is immensely entertaining.
What's the most entertaining part? I'm entertained by it too.
I guess what's most entertaining is because there seems to be a fairly deep inability to actually take personal responsibility for these failures, and mostly trying to shift blame onto others. The excuse,
like who?
Well, Mike Pence, someone that I wrote about in my own blog post about the conservative secular problem. He was on Fox News Sunday and trying to say, hey, this is a center-right nation. Conservatism is alive and well because Prop 8 got passed in California. And it's exactly that very strange sense of issues prioritization where most Americans think that conservative philosophy of government failed over the last 8 years, that conservative foreign policy made us less safe. And to hang your hat on, hey, we stopped gay people from getting married. Yes, gay marriage is not supported by a majority of the country. But to put that at the top of your list as evidence that you're on the right track, I think really confuses a lot of people. And if that's the attitude that conservatives are going to take, that, hey, everything's okay because Prop 8 got passed, I think...
Yeah, we've been watching very different debates over the future conservatism because I haven't seen Prop 8 talked about much.
When we talked about this before, I thought you were coming at this from a little bit more of a... more of a reality-based perspective than some of your brethren. I think the love of Sarah Palin post-election I find bizarre.
I'm strongly in the love Sarah Palin camp.
For what reason?
Because I love her.
I know you hate the polar bears. I know that's why you love Sarah in the first place. But if you could lay out, and I don't want to get this just between you and me. Obviously, I want to get into what conservative bloggers are saying. But
how about we do that? How about we start with David Brooks's article from this past Sunday, which he tried to frame the debate, and he tried to frame the debate as traditionalists, which includes Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Grover Norquist, Americans for Tax Reform, Family Research Council, blah 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 blah. And he defined the core ideas as cutting government, cutting taxes, restricting immigrations, and rally behind Sarah Palin. That's camp number one. Then there's camp number two, according to Brooks, which is the reformers. And they argue that the old GOP priorities were fine for the 70s, but need to be modernized for new conditions. The reformers tend to believe that American voters will not support a party whose main idea is slashing government. And the actual reformers are people like David Frum, Ross Douthat, Ryan Salam, Ramesh Ponnuru, Yuval Levin, Jim Mansley, Rod Dreyer, and Peggy Noonan. So those are the two camps of conservatism as David Brooks sees it.
You see it?
No. Well, let me put it this way. No, I think there is a grain of truth there. I just don't think that the reformer camp is as big as he thinks it is. When I read that article, I was reminded of a scene in Casino where Joe Pesci's character and Robert De Niro's character are talking. Robert De Niro's character is trying to tell Joe Pesci that he's out of control and he needs to calm down, or else he's going to be in trouble. And Joe Pesci's character basically tells De Niro, "You better get your own effing army, pal." And that's the exact thought I thought I had when I read Brooks's piece. Is I don't know who he thinks the conservative movement is, that he can just write off the Hannitys and Limbaughs of the world, because Hannity and Limbaugh have an army of people who actually listen to them and vote, and David Brooks does not. He has a lot of people that read him.
Brooks was acknowledging that. That was
a
the
little
end
bit.
Of,
He did go on and talk about that. But Rod Dreyer made the same point in a blog post. Rod writes, "Let me make a point that's going to be overlooked among secular conservatives or reformist impulse. No conservative movement that hopes to be successful can do without religious conservatives. It will be very easy for secular reform conservatives to sell op-ed pieces to newspapers in which they argue that the GOP will not be revived until and unless it cuts itself free from the religious right. It'll be easy for them to sell that point because it suits the prejudices of the kind of secular liberals who run the media, but it's quite wrong."
Well, I wrote in my own post about your secular problem. The country has been, about 40 in the 2004 election, 43% of the country went to church seldom or never. 43% of voters in 2004 went to church seldom or never. They trend Democrat. 42% went to church weekly or more. They trended Republican. And it basically said to me at the time that there was an equivalent. People said Democrats had a religion problem. Well, if so, the Republicans have an equivalent secular problem. In this most recent election, the percentage of the weekly church-going vote shrank a bit, went down to 39%. That secular vote went up to 44%. And McCain's share of the secular vote relative to Bush dropped 6 points. Now, a Democratic candidate is not going to survive on secular votes alone. And in fact, Obama performed better amongst weekly churchgoers than either Gore or Kerry did. You need to have some kind of religious secular coalition. You got to find some common ground. But if the reaction of the conservative movement is going to be, "Hey, stop picking on religious conservatives," you're missing the point. There is a large pool of voters outside of that you are having a harder and harder time reaching. And so, what policy ideas are you going to come up with that can achieve some common ground?
Yeah, I do think there's that the traditionalist versus reformer frame is bad and unhelpful. Yuval Levin had a post at the corner noticing an interview with Bobby Jindal. He said, "An interesting interview with Bobby Jindal, who among other things dismisses the supposed distinction between reformists and traditionalists. He says we can and must be both, and he's right. Governor Tim Pawlenty made much the same point today." Then he quotes from a newspaper article. "Pawlenty implored the room of Republicans not to give into the emerging reform versus traditional arguments as to what's wrong with the party. Both are true, and both can be harmonized." And Yuval comments quite right. And I agree with Yuval strongly. When I did a little review of Ross and Rehan book, The Grand New Party, I noted that most of it sounded pretty much exactly like what Reagan was saying in the 70s about trying to wed the social conservative and economic conservative wings of the party into a common both policies and narrative. It's something that has been a problem of the conservative movement since there's been a modern conservative movement. It was solved for a little while during the 80s and a little bit into the 90s. and it's broken down along some lines now. There are people who think their priorities are the highest, but it's been solved before, and it's going to be solved again. These are not, brand new questions that the conservative movement has never faced again. We've been here before, and we just need...
I'm not sure you have been here before.
Okay, make the case.
I don't think you've been in a place where, and maybe you want to make the argument that, 8 years of George Bush didn't amount to real conservatism.
I think I will.
I think a lot of voters would disagree with that. And I mean, we certainly can agree that the 8 years have been a very bad 8 years as far as policy success is concerned. And therefore, you're starting at a very different place than I think you were at 1964 or 1976 or 1992.
No, I think 76 is a perfect analogy.
How so?
Well, you had a bunch of unconservative crap that Nixon passed, with price controls and a whole bunch of new regulations.
Outside of the very end of the Bush administration, where they became sudden socialists and nationalized the banks.
Well, what do you mean very end? What was the first thing out of the box was No Child Left Behind. That was a fundamental betrayal of Reagan's vision on education, which was always to put the decision-making on the most local level possible, at the state and local levels. That was, right out of the box, a fundamental betrayal. Right after that, you had Medicare Part D, which that's the famous Tom DeLay twisting arms, votes lasting longer than 14 minutes. The
Tom
Bush
DeLay,
administration...
notorious liberal.
Well, Tom DeLay enforcer for the Bush White House. That's exactly what he was. And that thing is that Bush got DeLay on board, kept the votes open longer than the rules allowed, browbeat conservatives that I was actually working on the Hill at the time into getting them to vote against something they knew they did not want to do.
Which,
those
of course,
those are two big, massive agenda items right off the bat.
A big subsidy to big
9/11.
insurance companies, not exactly a liberal proposal.
And the largest expansion of Medicare since Johnson.
Some might argue a step towards partial privatization of Medicare, which needed to be stopped.
But also the largest expansion of Medicare since its inception. Those are two huge betrayals of limited government conservatism right out of the box. We're still in the first 6 months of George Bush's presidency.
Now, are you going to just ignore the Bush tax cuts? Are you going to ignore Bush's deregulation? Are you going to ignore Bush's foreign policy?
The 2001 tax cuts weren't great. The 2001 tax cuts were basically rebate stimulus, which doesn't really work. The 2003 tax cuts were better, which most of it, 80% of it, Barack Obama wants to keep. All those R&D tax credits, most of the cap gains tax cuts. He wants to raise a little bit, but he wants to keep most of the Bush tax cuts.
So we could raise taxes on those earning over $250,000, a proposal which everyone on your side called socialist until a week ago.
Right. I'm not saying that Barack Obama is keeping all of it, but he's keeping most of it. So I'd say the 2003 tax cuts were good.
Another way to characterize it is that Barack Obama proposed a progressive vision of tax fairness, which conservatives uniformly called socialist.
Okay, you're completely derailing the argument over what Bush did and didn't. I'm ceding that the 2003 tax cuts were good. The 2001 tax cuts were bad. You also mentioned regulation. There has been no deregulation under Bush. There's been an increase in regulation, both in regulatory spending, the number of regulatories made.
Exactly.
These are facts. These are hardcore facts. I will put up the numbers. I've blogged about it a number of times. The regulatory state has thrived under the Bush administration. We will be making the case forcefully and often that the David Brooks, Michael Gerson, Karl Rove, Tom DeLay, George Bush, big government conservatism
all those
was wrong.
Hedge funds strangled by government regulation.
And Dick Armey had a great
swaps.
Dick Armey had a great post in the Wall Street Journal saying compassionate conservatism failed. Obviously you disagree, but that is the direction that the party is going.
Well, here's where I think you potentially have a problem, though. So let's say you're right, which I wholly don't agree with. But let's say you have really nailed the proper critique of Bush's failures.
Mm-hmm.
You now have to deal with an Obama Democratic Congress record, which I suspect, I think they'll have the numbers to get a good deal of what they want through. A lot of these ideas are going to involve a role for government, and you're going to have to react to that.
Definitely.
I fully expect to have to engage in many policy debates, so I don't think any of these things are going to be done, again, on a glide path. We're going to have to argue for them and keep having to win arguments in the realm of public opinion. And maybe this is getting ahead of the argument, but are you guys prepared to deal with a situation when Obama is considered to have done a better job than Bush going into 2012? What does that? How good is your critique of the Bush administration going to fare if you're dealing with a successful Obama administration?
Wait, so you want me to suppose into evidence that all of Barack Obama policies are awesome and that the country is just going to be awesome in 2012?
It might be getting ahead of things.
In that case, the GOP will be in trouble. If everything goes out great and Barack Obama is perfect and his presidency goes awesome, yeah, the GOP is going to be in trouble in 2012. I'll go ahead and grant that.
So I guess the question is, because you have to decide, the conservative movement has to decide a strategy going forward.
Yes.
Is it just hang back, let those crazy Obama bots overreach,
mm-hmm.
and because we know deep down that a bigger role for government is going to drive everything into the ground,
mm-hmm.
Or is it, some of these things might actually be decent ideas. Let's try to stop them in the Senate so they don't happen, and then we could knock Obama for inaction.
Yeah. You have the David Brooks of the world, who, as he said this weekend, the Republicans should go into yes but mode, which to me is Me Too mode, and that's a failure. And then you have pretty much everyone else in the party who is like in the hell no branch. And so, yeah, I think you're going to see...
But there's two kinds of hell no. There's hell no, we think this is a bad idea,
mm-hmm.
and we'll let it happen so you can see how bad an idea it is.
Mm-hmm.
Or... we're going to say it's a bad idea, but we're actually a little concerned it's a good idea, and let's try to strangle it in the crib so it can't actually be implemented.
No, I don't think there's much of a worry that Barack Obama has any good ideas.
You're going to take the stance of letting it happen, so you can then talk about its bad effects after the fact.
No, I mean, speaking very blanketly here, we're going to have to go on specifics here. I mean, you kind of cut me off before, but when I was going to talk about why I disagreed with the Brooks framing of the traditionalist versus reformist wings, is that I think in law there's a doctrine, the case and controversy doctrine, which is courts aren't allowed to decide on a case until there's actually facts and evidence that they can apply the law to. And I think that's what's wrong with the tradition versus reform debate, is that it's just arguing in generalities. And until Barack Obama actually puts forward his green-collar job, Marshall, New Deal, awesome plan with specifics, I think it's silly to debate what we're going to go after, what we're going to allow, etc. Until there's actually, he's sworn in and he's actually submitting stuff to Congress, I think it's premature to say this is what we should do on this issue. Like I said when we started off, we're going to be reacting to Obama, and I don't think you can say we're going to oppose everything, we're going to let everything go. It depends on the specific policy.
Is there more you want to get into on the subject, or should we push on to Iraq and Lieberman before we run out of time? I
just really wanted to touch quickly on some of the stuff going on at the Next Right.
Sure.
Patrick Ruffini has set up a new site called rebuildtheparty.com, which, as he says, is a group of under 40 operatives. I'm glad I fit under that umbrella. It's a 10-point action plan for the next RNC chairman. The plan's outline includes a number of specific proposals and metrics for success, including 5 million new online activists, amendment of $100,000 raised online by targeted congressional candidates, candidates in all 435 House districts, and 25,000 new people who can work on campaigns and run their neighborhoods. So this is an effort by Patrick Ruffini and more of the online right to influence what the RNC is doing, not a 50-state strategy, but a 435 House district strategy as they're selling it.
But a lot of that strikes me as trying to upgrade the party's technological capabilities.
This is true.
How much of this is going to be actually about trying to come up with some new conservative policy ideas?
As far as what that specific site is?
Yeah.
No, that specific site is going to be more about tactics.
Okay.
There's plenty of other arenas, the American scene, the corner, we at Heritage like to think we're in the ideas business. But that site in particular is going to be more of a tactics place. But yeah, that's all I had on that.
Okay. I don't want to keep us here too much longer, but there's a couple other topics I thought were getting some buzz. One, a lot of liberal bloggers are hammering Joe Lieberman again. There's a Lieberman Must Go site, LiebermanMustGo.com, started by Brave New Films, trying to drum him out of the party, strip him of his chairmanship. This has gotten wide support through many prominent bloggers. Coase has said why, because to the victor go the spoils. It's called democracy, and people made their preferences fell to the ballot box. Matt Stoller expressed some consternation that Obama wasn't siding with them.
Not only that, he successfully lobbied Dick Durbin to switch his vote.
Is that right?
It's true.
But he still said
he's not only being neutral. He's actively campaigning against you.
I'm sorry. Durbin switching his vote which way?
Oh, Durbin was for stripping him of the committee membership. Then Barack Obama talked to him, and now Dick Durbin is against.
Gotcha. So Stoller said it's worth noting that Harry Reid was on the side of Democratic primary voters, but most Democrats in the Senate and Obama were not. It's a choice. They made it. I hope the price they extracted from Lieberman was worth it. Jack and Jill, I thought, probably made the strongest argument against Lieberman sticking around. Lieberman's comments and conduct around Katrina alone should disqualify him from any position of importance among Democratic leaders, not to mention his continued reluctance to hold any hearings around the management of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. This guy should not be rewarded with the prominent position of a Homeland Security Committee chair, making more of a substantive argument that he wasn't a good committee chair. Whereas Jason Zengerle of the Republic says, I see merits on both sides of the debate, but I think the heatedness of the debate is absurd. On one side, you have the unnamed Lieberman aide who blustered, quote, that political retribution should not go ahead of Homeland Security, as if the opening Al-Qaeda has been waiting for us for Lieberman to get moved to the Small Business Committee. And then on the other side, you have Coase, who's claiming for Harry Reid to be removed as majority leader if he doesn't strip Lieberman of his Homeland Security chairmanship. I realize that with the election, there's a bit of a news vacuum right now, but this vacuum has to be filled with such lunacy. I think that's a little harsh. Again, I think there is a substantive argument to be made that Lieberman's not a good person to be in such an important chairmanship. But I think it does raise some issues for the blogosphere as a whole. Sort of what is going to be the best role for the blogosphere to play going forward? Is it going to be about building on the progressive mandate and getting some particular legislative items passed, or are folks going to be more comfortable in sort of an oppositional mode and finding things to criticize? And there are probably going to be blogs that go in different directions, but I think it's something to keep an eye on as far as what... I don't think it's known right now which direction the overall blogosphere is going to go.
No, it's very fascinating. I mean, I remember when I first heard Rahm was going to be named the chief of staff, I was on Open Left as fast as I could get there. And reading all the lefty blogs to see what would be said, and it was a very muted response.
Yeah.
So I think just like when Obama finally starts submitting legislation, we're on the right going to be prioritizing as far as what policies are unacceptable, what policies are acceptable. I think you guys are in much the same mode with Obama, and I think there was. I'm not privy to your email lists, or maybe you all made the same decision. Without communicating, but it seemed like there was a collective decision that Rahm as chief of staff wasn't worth it, that there were bigger fights to be had.
Oh, I don't think there's any collective decisions made about that. I think there is general, feeling things out. I don't think it's as nearly as top down as.
But you guys, I'm not saying it's top down, but you guys do have internal discussion email lists. Not all of your discussions are public.
There are people that have private email discussions on the left and the right. I don't believe there was any kind of private decision to say, okay, people, let's not make a big deal about Rahm.
Fair enough.
I think typically when you see, mixed reactions or muted reactions, it's usually a sign of there not being any kind of, organic consensus on the subject.
Well, I covered the netroots for over a year, and they don't like Rahm, and it's not like they're somewhat muted or ambivalent about it. They really don't like him.
Bill Buehler and I talked about this a little bit last week. I mean, I think there was a sincere split mind on it. I think most bloggers don't like Rahm on policy, don't think he's a real liberal Democrat, but they like that Rahm is a badass that gets things done. So the question is he going to be a badass in league of a real progressive agenda, or is he going to be someone trying to hem Obama in and go small? And it's a question that we don't know. And that speaks to the post I cited from Josh Marshall before. He's going on the presumption that Obama promised to go big, and I'm assuming the cabinet people and the staff people he's picking, regardless of where their own policy inclinations are, he's picking based on their experience of getting things done that he wants to get done. And I think to the extent you're going to see blogger criticisms, in the end, it's going to be about policy decisions and not personnel. But Lieberman is someone who generates such animus, sort of been, a white whale for a long time. You see much more collective consensus organized around punishing him, which is not where Obama's head is at, because Obama's thinking, hey, I need 60 votes however I can get them.
Right, but that's all true. I also think it's a part of it is that with the Lieberman thing, there's a non-Obama villain you guys can attack, namely Harry Reid. And even though Obama now is playing more of an openly pro-Lieberman role, I don't think you guys have the stomach, or not even stomach's not the right word. I don't think you guys really think the Lieberman issue is important enough to attack Obama on. In that Lieberman's bad, but he's not FISA. So I don't think you guys are gonna I don't think you guys are gonna make a stink over the fact that Obama's lobbying for Lieberman.
Well, some have.
Directed at Obama?
Yeah, Stoller just did.
Stoller, but not a majority of you guys.
I mean, it's hard we have these discussions because I'm generally of the view that every blogger is responsible for his or own blogging. Where it's not remotely as coordinated as sometimes our discussions can make it out to be. I do think you find if you look at the overall sweep of it, people are still overall, pretty giddy. Many bloggers were not Obama cheerleaders throughout the campaign, but they're still pretty impressed with what he accomplished, and there's hope that there's some big agenda items that can get passed. That's generally where people are. But the fact that you see some criticism about Obama does show that people are not, bloggers have generally not been Obama Kool-Aid drinkers, and they're going to criticize when they see a need to criticize.
Fair enough. Sticking with the theme of interesting Obama decisions, this one is a little premature, but the reports are more and more. I know you sent me some links that said it was only 10%, but from what I read just before we went online, the more recent reports I'm seeing are one that's kind of more firm, and that is that Obama is leaning towards asking Robert Gates to stay on for at least a year as defense secretary.
Well, this is another issue where I think there's been a split in the blogosphere. Spencer Ackerman, who's probably been one of the more notable liberal foreign policy bloggers, was praising the idea of retaining Gates. He said, politically, it's a masterstroke.
Right.
Many in the military are looking to see how the Obama administration will accommodate them or offend them. There are a lot of men with stars on their shoulders who oppose Obama's plans for withdrawal from Iraq, and many of them will be ready to plant the narrative in the press that Obama is another Bush, shunting aside his best military advice in favor of his ideologically driven schemes. Asking Gates to stay demolishes that. For one thing, Gates is a skeptic about withdrawing from Iraq on a timetable, so he'll give Obama a thoughtful dose of caution to better craft the strategy, but also transition from being a Secretary of the Defense behind the surge to being the Secretary of Defense behind withdrawal, and he'll do that as a Republican. Whereas Cernig...
If you had given me this post by Spencer 6 months ago, I would have thought you were insane. I would have said there's no way Spencer Ackerman wrote this post. But I was talking about this with Ari. Unfortunately, we had some audio problems that never aired. But we had God, I'm breaking his not Ordierno, the big one. Petraeus came by and spoke here at Heritage about the success of the surge, and we got more traffic from the lefty blogosphere coming in. Talking good about Petraeus, only because they interpreted some of his comments as supporting Obama's notion that we need to talk to our enemies. But, it opened my eyes to how flexible the lefty blogosphere was willing to be on Iraq and willing to be in accepting the decisions that Petraeus and Odierno are going to be making on the ground. And, Ackerman and Eli Lake had a blogging as early this week talking about Obama in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Eli asked Spencer straight out, how much do you think Obama's going to defer to his generals? And Spencer says, pretty much entirely. So
I think flexibility to a point. I mean, I don't think people will be so flexible that if they said we have to stay for the next 4 years, people would not like that.
Right. But
as far as the tactics and how you get there, sure, there's flexibility. Right. But there's other folks who are, certainly get news hoggers.
Right, it's definitely not unanimous. There are then the dissenters.
And it comes down to how do you view personnel decisions through what prism? Are you assuming that having Gates inherently means you're backtracking on your withdrawal plans, or are you using these experienced folks to implement your withdrawal plans? And it's an unknown until the administration is fully in place and we see how things play out. But it's notable that this kind of discussion is kicking up in the blogosphere, I think.
Good. I think it's a good place to end, Bill.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Talk to you soon.
Yep.